Hello everyone, I'm Zhu. My theme is cultural minorities. First, let's see what is culture and what's the situation of cultural minorities. Culture includes the knowledge, attitudes, values, and customs that characterize a social group. Culture is one of the most important influences in our lives, and it can also influence success in school. The cultural diversity in the United States is rapidly increasing. U.S. Census estimates indicate that members of cultural minorities now make up more than a third of the nation's population. This trend is reflected in the classrooms, where more than 4 of 10 students in the preschool to 12th grade population are members of cultural minorities. Children of color currently make up the majority of public school enrollments in California, Hawaii, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico, and Texas, and over 90% of the student population in Detroit, New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, and Baltimore. To get more about the situation, let's see an important part of a culture, ethnicity. Ethnicity is a person's ancestry and the way individuals identify with the nation from which they or their ancestors came. Immigration and other demographic shifts have resulted in dramatic changes in the ethnic makeup of the United States school population. Please look at this figure. This is from U.S. Bureau of Census of 2003. It shows the changes in school-age population from 2000 to 2020. By the year of 2020, the school-age population will see great changes. Researchers predict significant increases in all groups of students except those that are white and non-Hispanic, who will decrease to 53.5% of the total school population. This is the situation of cultural minority students. Now let's see the characteristics of these learners. I will talk about the characteristics of these learners in 3 aspects: culture, family, and cognition. First, culture. Educational psychologists and anthropologists have long attributed so-called resistance to schooling in minority youth to cultural discontinuities between home and school environments. Minority children may experience more difficulty in engaging with their schoolwork when behavioral norms and repertoires in class differ greatly from familiar norms and practices at home. Consequently, ethnic minority students with a collectivist cultural background may have to cope with conflicting goal stresses in family and school contexts. Second, family. Compared with native parents with a similar social class background, ethnic minority parents typically express higher aspirations and a more academic orientation toward non-vocational secondary and higher education for their children. At the same time, in United States, minority parents typically perceive educational investment in the children as the primary means to improving the family's living standards and socioeconomic status. From their side, minority youth often perceive educational progress as a family obligation and as an effective way to achieve a better future. For the cognition part, we need to talk about cognitive style first. Cognitive style, the way that we acquire, process, and display information, varies from person to person. Youngsters from non-mainstream cultural groups often possess cognitive styles that differ from those promoted in the schools. This mismatch can lead to misunderstandings and culturally inappropriate interaction, assessment, instruction, or display. One of the most common systems of differentiating cognitive styles is on a continuum of field independent to field dependent. While these two types of learners differ in the strategies and types of material they incorporate most easily. For example, European Americans who tend to be field independent are better able to perceive elements as discrete from their backgrounds and extract specific information from the surrounding field. Field-dependent individuals attend to the total context to find information and perceive elements as parts of a total picture. Their holistic thinking pattern, with its emphasis on synthesis into a whole, makes them less able to screen out distractors and unrelated information. These are the characteristics of the cultural minorities learners. These characteristics lead to their main challenges in learning: cultural mismatch and cognitive differences. Cultural mismatch is a clash between a child's home culture and the culture of the school that create conflicting expectations for students and their behavior. There are three aspects of cultural mismatch: cultural attitudes and values, stereotype threat, cultural differences in adult-child interactions. Cultural attitudes and values have a powerful influence on learning. International comparisons reveal that students in Asian countries typically score significantly higher on achievement tests than their counterparts in the United States. In contrast, members of some cultural minorities, such as African American, Native American, and Hispanic American, constantly score lower on achievement tests. Sometimes, members of these groups form resistance cultures, cultures with beliefs, values, and behaviors that reject the values of mainstream culture. To maintain their identity within their chosen group, members of resistance cultures reject attitudes and behaviors that lead to school success, such as doing homework, studying, and participating in class. To become a high achiever is to become white, and students who study want to succeed and become actively involved in school face rejection from their peers. This is the first challenge. Stereotype threat is the anxiety felt by members of a group resulting from concern that their behavior might conform a stereotype. For example, it exists when women fear that they will do less well than men on tests involving math or computer science because they think that these are male domains, or when white males fear they will perform less well on math tests because they are competing with Asian students who they believe are better at math. The third challenge is cultural differences in adult-child interactions. Cultural interaction patterns learned in the home also influence student behavior in school. Students from different cultures bring with them ways of acting and interacting with adults that differ from the traditional teacher as authority figure role. For example, Barbara Rogoff found that white children tend to respond comfortably to questions requiring specific answers, such as, "What's this story about?" African American children, accustomed to questions that are more open-ended story starter types, are sometimes confused by the specific questions because they aren't viewed as information givers in their homes. Challenge of cognitive differences is that the instructional methods typically used in the educational settings are often incompatible with the cognitive styles and experiences of culturally and linguistically different students. Schools typically promote a style of cognition consistent with that of the European American cultural group. Given that culturally different students are most often taught information in a European American context and a presentational style that is frequently opposed to their preferred manner of learning. It is no surprise then that minority culture pupils commonly fail to learn as well as majority culture learners. For the challenges of the cultural minorities students, we have some strategies for teachers. For the cultural attitudes and values challenge, teachers can use accommodation without assimilation, a process used to help members of cultural minorities adapt to the dominant culture without losing their cultural identities. Minority role models are especially important in this process. Minority role models provide learners with evidence that they can both succeed in mainstream culture and retain their cultural identity. For cultural differences in adult-child interactions challenge, teachers can use building and maintaining relationships and exercising holistic care strategies. For example, teachers can not only have a positive teacher-student working relationship with the students, but also be a friend to the students. And teachers can not only care students as individuals, but also care them as people from their culture. There is also a strategy called care before censure. The idea of care before censure offered an alternative to a crime and punishment ideology for responding to discipline-related problems. But more importantly, it also provided new opportunities to build the educational capacity of students and teachers to take responsibility and respond to these problems in positive and caring, non-threatening ways. There are 4 general principles. First, responses to challenging and disruptive behavior need to be individualized, but appropriate to the cultural background of the student and appropriate to the nature of the wrongdoing. Second, challenging and disruptive behavior can be understood as an indication of other problems. Third, students from minorities cultures may not have the appropriate language or strategies to express their emotions or concerns in ways that are acceptable to majority culture teachers. Fourth, challenging and disruptive behaviors provide opportunities for further learning about how to behave or react. For stereotype threat challenge, teachers have 3 ways. First, communicate positive expectations for all learners from the first days of class. Second, make individual improvement the theme of your teaching and minimize comparisons among students. And third, model and emphasize the role of hard work and effort in learning. We can also find some strategies from multicultural education, which examines ways that culture influences learning and attempts to find ways that students' cultures can be used to enhance achievements. For example, from Table 4.1, to modify students' attitudes toward their groups of students, to illustrate ideas using content from a variety of cultures, and so on. In multicultural classroom, instruction can be adapted to student style via 3-phase progress. First, to identify the particular student trait that may require some change in instructional approach. Second, to question oneself regarding the validity and degree of a student's difference from the typical teaching style. Third, to define and implement the new instructional modifications. I am a Chinese teacher. In my Chinese classroom, I have some specific strategies. For cultural attitudes and values, I will show my African American students some champions of Chinese bridge contest who are also African American to encourage them to learn Chinese. For cultural differences in adult-child interactions, I will build and maintain good relationship with my cultural minorities students as a Chinese teacher as well as a friend, and carry them not only as students but also as people from their cultures. Because as a Chinese, I'm also from a minority culture, so it is easier for me to build relationship with cultural minorities students. For stereotype threat, I will communicate positive expectations on Chinese to my students, focus on individual development in Chinese by comparing scores with one's old scores, and praise who works hard on Chinese work using Chinese presents or other Chinese ways. For multicultural education, when I teach Spring Festival of Chinese New Year, I will let students from other cultures talk about what people do in their culture to celebrate their New Year's. And these are my references. Thanks for watching. I'm Zhu. Bye bye.